Hi everyone, it's Guillaume from Startup Basecamp. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. During the show, you will have the opportunity to meet the best climate tech founders, investors, and experts from both Silicon Valley and around the globe. They will share with you their stories and personal journeys into this growing and exciting industry, giving you some insight into the ecosystems that help you to take part in the fight against climate change and benefit from the opportunities it can represent. The podcast is divided in two small interviews. So in the first part, you will get to know our speakers, their perspectives on the climate crisis and how climate tech is changing the game. The second part of the discussion will be for members of our community who will learn the speakers' secret sauce on how to and share with you their unique expertise on topics such as fundraising, management, strategy, and so on, to help you to become a better leader in your field. So before we start, I would like to quickly share what we are doing at Startup Basecamp to support climate tech founders in accessing resources and gaining visibility with investors they seek. Our initiatives include a membership-based community platform offering access to a dedicated Slack group with a growing number of founders, experts, and investors from around the world, and a series of exclusive content such as interviews, weekly job listings, events, and our quarterly online pitch night opportunity. But more than a place where you can learn, exchange, and grow, we are building a matchmaking service to facilitate connections between our members and top investors and experts in the field. And soon, alongside with other top investors, we will be launching a small fund to co-invest in the growth and acceleration of our members. Finally, all of this is possible because of your support and donations. We are a small self-funded team, and we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. So please share one episode with a friend and subscribe to the channels. As an added bonus, we will plant a tree for each of our subscribers each time we reach 1,000 new fans or donors. Do not hesitate to connect with me via social media or email guillaume@startupbasecamp. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope to get in touch with you soon. And now, let's go for the show. Hi everyone, in today's episode, we will speak with Dr. David Miller, co-founder and managing director at Clean Energy Ventures. A firm based out of Boston is on a mission to beat back climate change through energy innovation by funding disruptive startups with capital-light technologies and innovative business models that can reshape how we produce and consume energy. I was excited to have David and his incredible wisdom on the show to learn more about his impressive story as a successful engineer and telco entrepreneur, which started in the mid-90s, followed by his realization that climate change will define the 21st century, leading him to go back to MIT to get a PhD with a thesis focused on how to improve the odds of success and growth for clean energy startups. Since 2005, David has invested in clean energy startups, putting a tremendous effort into building ecosystems that support founders and finally launching Clean Energy Ventures with two other partners. During the show, David will give greater detail into the investment thesis behind their strong statement that every climate tech startup they invest in has the potential to mitigate 2.5 gigatons of CO2 by 2050, and how they put together an innovative calculator to drive their investment decision. After covering the state of the climate tech ecosystem today, are we in a bubble or not, David will share his view on electric versus hydrogen-powered vehicles and his opinion on nuclear as a solution in the energy mix. Finally, he will highlight underdogs areas in climate tech pushed by emerging market forces in which he sees exciting potential for investments and growth. In the second part of the show, David will share the secret sauce that can increase your odds to fundraise successfully. You will also learn some key red flags that makes investors pass on deals. Finally, you will get a few valuable tips on work-life balance for founders and investors. David, welcome to the show. Hi, David. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. We are super happy and very excited to have you here with us today.
Great to be here.
Thank you, thank you. And so before we start, we always like to ask a little bit about like if you can give us a 30-second introduction about clean energy ventures.
30 seconds. Well, I'm sure we'll talk a lot more later, but so our group has been investing in early stage clean energy technologies for 16 years now. Our current fund is Clean Energy Ventures Fund 1, which is a $110 million fund focused on finding funding and supporting the companies that will make the most difference in mitigating climate change, and where we could add a ton of value in the process. And typically we're the first institutional investor in those companies.
Super exciting. So let's start from the top. Can you tell us a bit more about your story, your impressive background, as you're wearing at least two big hats as entrepreneurs and investors? So tell us a little bit about this long journey that you had so far.
Sure. So my personal background is engineering, multiple degrees. Started a telecom software company in the mid-90s, ended up through a series of acquisitions being acquired by Lucent Technologies. And there I went to sit on the other side of the table after being an entrepreneur, raising venture capital for my company. I went to be in venture capital, originally in corporate venture capital for Lucent, primarily commercializing Bell Labs technologies while Bell Labs was still Bell Labs. And while I was there, and this was 1999, and thinking about where to next, I came to the realization that more than anything else, that climate change would define the 21st century. And I decided I wanted to do something positive to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. And that led me to clean energy. It led me go back to school at MIT, where I had my original degrees from, and get a PhD focusing on, my PhD dissertation was on how do you improve the odds of success of clean energy startups and how do you enable them to grow faster. So that was my research. And then parallel to that, I started personally investing in clean energy startups with a number of colleagues and partners starting in 2005. And then over time, through a series of vehicles, that's what led to our current fund. And also, the other thing I've really focused on, along with my partners, is developing the ecosystem for clean energy and climate techs, particularly in the Northeast United States, but whether it be public-private partnerships, industry coalitions, business plan competitions, but creating an ecosystem that would support the development of transformative startups.
Exciting. So what was your driver in a way to jump into the impacts, clean, and today climate tech industry? As the name is evolving also with the years, and you've been involved since almost the beginning, and you saw all of that. So did you have any aha moment that really pushed you? You mentioned that climate change was something that you started to get concerned about it, but can you tell us a bit more about this in a way driver or that push you?
Sure. So yeah, as I mentioned, going back to 1999, and I was thinking about where to next after my company had been acquired, and I decided I wanted to do something that would contribute to the world in some way. And I was thinking along different time frames. Really, in the longest time frame, I was thinking about space exploration, like how do we expand beyond this planet. In the shortest time frame, I was thinking about education. How do we get better? How do we help the next generation to be better than we are? But in the medium time frame, which I defined as really the next century, and that's the time frame in which I'm going to be around and my kids are going to be around, I realized that more than anything else, that climate change would be the driver of, how successful our civilization would be, frankly. And unfortunately, it could have, extremely detrimental effects on the lives of hundreds of millions or billions of people. But at that point, and still at this point, there's time to do something about that and mitigate that and change what was a tremendous challenge into an opportunity to remake particularly the energy industry. How do we produce, distribute, and use energy, which has a huge impact on climate, and other forms of area where there's a lot of pollution. How do we become more of a closed loop economy where waste becomes food, right? Waste becomes source. And at the same time, I had already started investing directly in early stage companies. And I have a strong belief and really based on research that the best innovations, and this has always been true, come from startups, come from new companies, not the huge incumbents. But when you really want to change how things are done, to be disruptive, that comes from startups. So the marriage of this huge challenge and the knowledge that startups could make a huge difference, and being in the business of investing in startups, all came together. And realized, like, look, we have to find, fund, and support the startups that are really going to be able to make the most difference. And these companies at their nascent stages often, and this was part of my research, often small differences could decide whether they're going to be successful or not. And we wanted to be the leverage for the companies that had the most potential to be the most successful.
Fantastic. And before we go, I guess too much into detail of the story of Clean Energy Venture, which is definitely the genesis that you just shared with us. Maybe let's zoom out a little bit. We like in this in this podcast to always kind of get like this overview and macro view of the ecosystem. So if you can give us your own overview of the climate tech ecosystem today. I mean, how is it different than the clean tech rush that took place almost 10 years ago? And are we in a bubble, or is it the fundamentals are there to last longer?
Yes and yes. So having done this for 16 years now, there have certainly been boom and bust cycles, and we had one kind of in the 2006 to 2010 range, a boom and a bust. And that's the way I think all markets work. And so it's not unusual. And in clean tech, of course, the bust in the early 2010s was harmful because it certainly inhibited the growth of companies at that time. We did our best to fill that gap, and that's really what motivated us originally to raise capital to enable us to have greater reach. But certainly that bust period and what was called clean tech at the point, was difficult. And now, fortunately, in many respects, we are in a boom period, and it's great to see new capital coming into the space. A lot more entrepreneurs, companies going public, companies at, very, very high valuations. And it's wonderful to see. And absolutely, I believe the fundamentals support the growth of this industry. I mean, this is, trillions and trillions of dollars that are going to go into this industry productively. But, it's still a cycle. And so it will not be unusual to see from the current boom period that, there may at some point be, some kind of downturn. It's 100% to be expected. And then subsequent booms after that. But the trend, goes up and down, but the trend is going to be up over time, clearly.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of maturity of the climate tech or clean tech ecosystem today, how do you see the ecosystem in that sense in terms of maturity? So we have the different stakeholders like venture funds like yours, accelerators, in this. I see more and more those, I would say, entrepreneurs coming from the tech industry moving into this climate tech ecosystem as well. So, but where are we to consider that the ecosystem in a way reach a level of maturity that will really create a dent and an impact in terms of reaching this 2050 net zero goal? Meaning we're not just like building prototypes, but what we reach is really creating an impact in itself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, looking over the last couple of decades, the ecosystem is so much more mature today. and it will continue to mature. But it's certainly at a point where it can support the development of companies that are going to enable the net zero world in 2050. I mean, we have 6 companies in our prior managed portfolio, another 15 in our current fund portfolio, each of which we think is going to have impact on the multi-gigaton scale. And of course, we're not the only investor, right? There are many other investors as well investing in very impactful companies. So yes, the companies that are starting today, that are being funded today, have tremendous opportunity to be impactful, and the ecosystem, whether it be the entrepreneurs or the investors, service providers, the markets for the company's products and services are rapidly progressing.
Fantastic. So let's go back now to a little bit more specific on the clean energy venture. So can you tell me a bit about, like, you already covered like the first part of the story, but how did you meet your co-founders and what was the secret of the alchemies? And then you guys started to decide, the first thesis or investment thesis behind your fund. So if you can tell us a little bit more about this thesis, is it still the same as the original one, or did you guys evolve? And maybe about the firm also, is like, I mean, what do you bring to your founders' portfolio? I mean, why should they choose you? It's a lot of questions.
That's a great question. One of my partners, Dan Goldman, and I met, I think originally in 2003. And we were both looking at investing in early stage clean tech or climate tech companies at that time. And after running across each other coincidentally a few times, and then maybe not so coincidentally a few more times, it became evident that it made sense to work together. And we formed what we call a Clean Energy Venture Group in 2005. And our original set of partners, and on to this day, were folks kind of like ourselves who had started and run companies and sold those companies in many cases, and in many cases multiple times. And so folks who had the ability to make investments in new companies, and also had the background and experience and expertise to help those companies and to mentor them and to serve on the board, and also folks who had a significant focus on climate tech. So we started with 4 partners, and the group, Clean Energy Venture Group, continues to this day and has about 35 partners now, and has expanded geographically as well throughout many several different regions across the United States. And so kind of what that enabled us to do, having kind of the expertise and depth of experience in the group, is it enabled us to go very deep into the companies we were at first sourcing and diligencing and then investing in, and being able to help them quite a bit. And so it kind of solved the conundrum initially as angel investors, and now as a relatively small fund. I mean, Clean Energy Venture Fund is a $110 million fund. It solved the conundrum of a relatively small early stage fund. Often there's a conundrum of you have to choose that you're either going to spend a ton of your management time on a few companies, or you're going to spread out your management time over a larger portfolio. And you have to choose, and obviously you want a larger portfolio, but you also want to spend time on each company. So we've been fortunate to have a structure that enables us to do both. Because now we have eight people full-time on our fund team. We have an incredible board of advisors, including Ernie Moniz, former Secretary of Energy, and we have incredible advisors and consultants, and we have venture partners who are very actively supporting our diligence and management of companies, and that gives us the capacity to do both, to have a significant enough portfolio, and fund one will have 20 to 25 companies in the portfolio, and to be able to go very deep in diligence and then very deep in supporting the companies we invest in at the same time. And one thing we found is that, comparing us to other early stage investors, like when you often hear about early stage venture capital, it's a very risky endeavor, right? Yeah. And those really risky companies, not all of them survive, of course, when you're taking those big risks. And so it's very, very common for early stage risk-taking investors to have a lot of losses in the portfolio. You have a few home runs and you have a lot of losses. Well, I think because of our strategy of how deeply we support the companies we invest in, we've had very few losses on a relative basis. Not none, of course, we're not perfect, but a common metric is a capital loss ratio. And for us, over 32 companies, it's 2.5%. And for the industry, it's often, 20, 30%. Yeah. So ours is, significantly lower across the entire portfolio. So our companies tend to do well, and also when they exit, they're providing good returns and good multiples. And I'll say one other thing, which is we are extremely impact focused, right? We only will invest in companies that can have massive, and we'll talk more about how we measure this, right? But we only invest in companies that have massive impact potential in mitigating climate change. And our thesis is that that's not an either or, that supports us having really above market returns. Because when we find those companies that have massive impact potential, coupled with extraordinary teams, coupled with extremely profitable business models, coupled with sustainable competitive advantage and capital efficient business models, and everything we look for in this extensive diligence process we have, if you put that together, you end up with companies that are highly scalable, will have a huge impact, and as they have that huge impact, will be hugely profitable. And as they are hugely profitable, then they will have more impact, and it's a positive loop. And that's what we've been able to see in our portfolios.
Looks like the green unicorn that every climate tech investors are chasing. Fantastic. That's amazing. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about maybe one specific previous investment that you did? What made them special? Was it like the team, the market, the impact, and all the above that you mentioned before, and maybe a little bit in terms of sourcing process that you have. You're very involved with MIT, so probably it's also like one of your largest pipeline. But in a way, who should come to pitch you? You know what I mean?
Yep, great questions. Okay, well, I'll talk about one of the Fund One portfolio companies that I'm on the board of, so quite familiar with the story. So going back to sourcing, and this is very common. So a friend and colleague of mine in the industry, someone who actually had successfully created a solar company and sold that company, and who I was keeping in touch with, had mentioned this company, Pearl Certification, to me a number of years ago as something, to put on our radar, as something that, this is promising. This often happens with us is, again, we've been in the sector for quite some time. We have very deep networks, and so people know where to find us. And so they refer these really promising companies to us, and it was very nascent at the time. And often what we do is we'll follow a company, sometimes for years, to see, okay, are they beginning to realize what their potential was? And that's what happened with this particular company. And once we saw that, they were really proving their potential, that's when we invested. And what they do, and this is a sector that, we're very interested in, which is energy efficiency. It's kind of the low-hanging fruit. Particularly in buildings. Buildings use a lot more energy than they need to. They can be even more comfortable than they are using much less energy. And this is especially true for homes. And homes as an entire sector are wasting massive energy, and therefore causing lots of unnecessary emissions. And what we had seen over the years is lots of technologies that would improve the energy efficiency of homes, and at the same time make them more comfortable, create a great return on investment for the homeowner because they would pay for themselves in energy savings. And, it seems like it's a no-brainer, but the challenge is homeowners don't have tons of spare capital sitting around in their pocket. And so they would be hesitant to pay an upfront cost, even if there was a good reason to, right? So a lot of early adopters would get these technologies, but not the mass market. And incredibly frustrating because we know how valuable making homes more energy efficient were. So Pearl found a way to solve that fundamental problem. And the way they found to solve it was by directly linking the energy performance of homes to the value of the home, what the home would sell for. And they created this validated certification system by which, a lot of data is collected about the home, and Pearl analyzes that data. And through, a proprietary validated method comes up with a certification that is accepted by home appraisers and the Appraisal Institute and accepted by real estate brokers, and has been demonstrated across multiple studies to increase the value of a home by 5% on average. And 5% on the value of an entire home is huge, right? It's a lot. So now the homeowner, now it's a new equation, right? I'm going to spend maybe $2,000 on getting a super high efficiency heating and cooling system that's going to make my house a lot more comfortable and save me energy. And by the way, after I spend that $2,000, the next day my home is going to be worth $20,000 more if I sell it the day after that, right? Absolutely no brainer. So all of a sudden it becomes much easier to sell and deploy these super high energy efficient equipment. Solar panels, insulation, energy monitoring, anything that's improving energy performance of homes. And so it's completely unlocking that entire industry and, linking the energy performance to home value. And so that, highly, highly scalable. They're becoming a national standard. Multiple manufacturers like Lennox and Owens Corning and SunPower are, kind of standardizing across their contractor networks for these certifications. There are public-private partnerships with both the federal government and state governments that are looking for improving energy performance across the country, working closely with Pearl. So they're kind of the hub enabling now energy efficiency at scale. So incredibly exciting.
That's exciting. Thank you so much for sharing that that story and that business. It's incredible. So I would like to ask you a little bit now that we spoke about this specific company. If we zoom out a little bit in terms of sector, which are the one that, according to you, are the most promising in terms of like what we call the ICR or impact cash return, so meaning building like impactful companies while creating highly profitable business. Do you see any underdogs sector pushed by those emerging market forces that you would like to share with other investors listening to the show?
So like subsectors of clean energy?
It can be in clean energy, or I would say in general on the decarbonization of the ecosystem. I mean, the economy today. It's pretty broad. So where do you see as a climate tech investors, and probably let's take the focus of energy and impact that you guys are tackling. Where do you see that there is still like room for kind of like those golden nuggets that are sitting down there that no one is taking?
Right. Well, I just talked about a major one, which is energy efficiency, right?
Exactly.
And that's true across the economy. I was talking about, residential homes, but there's also commercial buildings, industrial buildings, tons of companies addressing that sector, and it's needed, right? I mean, there's tremendous energy waste, lots and lots of room for improvement, and not just in buildings, but across industrial processes, across transportation, any place that energy is used, there's often room to make it more efficient. And making it more efficient often has a very high return on investment because it generally tends to not be very costly and save a ton of money. So, I'd always I'll always talk about energy efficiency because there's just so much room for improvement. But, and then again, traditional, when people often think about, climate tech, they think about clean energy production, solar and wind and geothermal and hydro and again, lots and lots of room. Now, some of those industries are already scaling rapidly, solar and wind in particular. But we have companies in our portfolio, one called Leading Edge, one called Sun Density in particular, that are significantly improving energy production that will come from solar PV, as well in Leading Edge's case, significantly reducing the energy footprint of the production in the solar industry. So now that those industries are becoming larger, technologies that improve them have more and more impact because now they're having impact across larger industries. And then, energy management. So that's an area maybe that's a little less thought of. You think about energy production,
yeah.
But you have to get the energy from where it's produced to where it's used, right? And you have to do so efficiently. So it has to be, transmitted, distributed, monitored, tracked, right? So there's metering, there's transmission technologies, energy distribution technologies, right?
Yeah, and we all know that the grid in the US, it's a major slowdown for the move to the fully renewable energy or decentralized production. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. There's tons of room for improvement in the grid. And some of our companies are doing that, Line Vision in particular on the transmission side. And so, yes, you might have tons of renewable energy being produced, but you have to get it to where it's needed. And our grid needs lots of help. And then coupled with that, of course, is storage, right? Because that's the other thing. Well, if you're producing excess renewable energy, if you can't get it where it's needed immediately, you can store it. And so, of course, storage is a very hot area in the sector, whether chemical storage through lithium-ion batteries, and we have a company, Valexion, that's significantly improving the performance of really all kinds of lithium-ion batteries, making them safer, more energy dense, more power dense, and other forms of storage, underground storage, that could be significantly cheaper than chemical storage and therefore highly scalable. So that's, it's all linked together. And then, recycling, and especially as it applies to energy. So you think of all those lithium-ion batteries, what happens to them at their end of life? Well, that's a really, really important question because they have extremely valuable metals in them that are hard to extract on a raw basis. So you got to figure out how to reuse them. And so we have a company, Nth Cycle, that's doing that much more efficiently than other methods, saving tons of emissions in the process and also enabling the industry to become much more closed loop, which is just absolutely going to have to happen. Mobility and transportation, right? That's huge. We have one company, Clearflame, that's enabling, we talk a lot about electric vehicles, passenger vehicles, but you got to think, what about heavy duty transportation, right? There are a lot of emissions associated with really heavy duty trucking, marine, let's say, and those are harder to electrify right away. Maybe
we heard the story of Nikolai. So hopefully,
right?
Tesla is also pushing on that direction. There's a lot of stuff to do. So you're totally right.
Yeah. No, it's not going to happen overnight. So what if instead of a lot, and again, maybe this will happen in 30 years, but it's not going to happen overnight. In the meantime, you have these heavy duty diesel engines that are belching pollution into the air at very large scale that are not going away. So what if you could replace them tomorrow with diesel engines that have exactly the same performance, but run on low carbon or even no carbon or negative carbon fuels without compromising performance? You just, replace the engine. And so that's what the company Clearflame is doing. So that's enabling transition to low carbon, no carbon economy tomorrow, as opposed to decades from now, in an area of heavy duty transportation where there's tons and tons of emissions. We might talk about hydrogen later. I mean, hydrogen is another option, right? Certainly that applies to transportation and energy generation. And so that, clearly in many sectors of the economy, hydrogen already is important and will continue to be important. And we have to switch to what's known as green hydrogen.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's a good segue for my next question, David.
Sure.
So what's your take against this, electric power transportation versus hydrogen in terms of opportunities and deployment? I mean, we're all like, okay, EVs are like pushing the ways. Hydrogen is like something very incredible to propose, but the production of hydrogen in this green, blue, dark brown, they can all get a different colors, create also some challenges, and then the distribution of hydrogen as well. I was reading some stuff around that, and so where do you see that? Are we going to a mix? Is going to be one versus the others? What's your take on that?
So I think what you might hear me say in the answer to multiple questions, it's all of the above, right? So climate is such a pervasive, large problem that there can't be one solution. You have to have many, many solutions across every industry, right? So you have to maximize electrification and maximize utilization of green hydrogen, both at the same time. It's not an either or. And there are certain subsectors where each makes more sense. For passenger vehicles, electrification, is on its way and does make a ton of sense, right? And we're developing infrastructure that will support that. But hydrogen also, for other forms of transportation and other forms of industrial energy use, is already being used today. And so that you just switch it, the easiest path is you take, hydrogen already being used today and you switch it to green hydrogen. And so companies like Advanced Ionics, who can create green hydrogen at very, very low cost, that makes sense, because now it's a company isn't going to do it just because it's the right thing to do. They're going to do it because it saves them money. So when it's the right thing to do and it saves them money, that's when you have the transition. And so that's what companies like Advanced Ionics are enabling. So
thank you so much. I like to move quickly into nuclear. So many people see nuclear as this black sheep in the energy mix solution that you have today to produce abundant and predictable and low carbon energy. I mean, you all know. I mean, as well that Bill Gates is pushing the project with TerraPower in Wyoming, pouring millions into the new generation of reactors. So, what's your take on nuclear energy as a source? I mean, is it a danger? Is it a necessary risk to take to increase our chance against climate change? Yeah. Or anyway, it will be it's going to take too long to deploy and really have an impact against it.
So again, all of the above. We got to do it, and we got to do it in ways that are as fast as possible and that are scalable as possible. Certainly there are very interesting fusion technologies. This company Commonwealth Fusion, right in our backyard here, that has a ton of potential. And there's modular nuclear. But mostly efficient, but often safe molten salt reactors. I mean, so there are approaches. Most of them aren't in our investment portfolio because they tend to be a little bit more capital intensive. Mm-hmm. But there are certainly fantastic investors who have the capital resources to invest in these, and who should. And so, Bill Gates doing this makes a ton of sense, because we need carbon-free sources of energy. We need every carbon source-free source of energy that we can possibly get. And so to the extent that we can scale nuclear as soon as possible and safely, and many of these new technologies, really, most of these new technologies also significantly improve safety. And so, you're safe, you're scalable, And so, absolutely in favor of that.
Okay, so let's go back to clean energy venture, and let's speak about like the way you measure impact. Do you have any like specific process, framework, calculator? I heard to allow to in a way to stick to this claim that you guys have on the website, investing in companies that can mitigate 2.5 gigaton of CO2 by 2050. So how do you ensure that we're not in greenwashing on the founder side and trying to screw you?
That's a great question. It's a really important question, because I can tell you again, I mean, after investing in the sector for many years, it's very easy to invest in companies that are doing good things. They're doing good things, but there's often a question of, well, how scalable is this? How much of a difference is this going to make? It's good, but how much of an impact is it actually going to have on the world? How much of an impact is it going to have on climate, which is such a huge problem? So that's why we came up with this 2.5 gigaton metric, because we decided, look, we only have so many shots on goal. We spent a ton of time working with the companies we invest in. So if we're going to do that, we want to invest in companies that are going to make a huge difference, right? And so, yes, I mean, there are tons of companies that are doing great things, but we're in particular trying to conserve our bullets for the ones that are going to be most impactful. Certainly coming in at the early stage, right? So that's where the 2.5 gigaton metric came from. And then, yes, we had to decide, okay, well, how are we going to assess this? How are we going to determine it? And what we were doing at one time is, every company that was interesting, we'd start getting into details of how they're going to do it. But we evaluate, probably over 1,000 companies a year. So it's very time consuming to go into details with many of those companies. So we devised a screening tool that we call SERC, Simple Emission Reduction Calculator. And the simple is the key, because we had to find a way to screen across all these hundreds and hundreds of companies that are coming into us in a way that would be very quick and easy, but still give us an idea, a pretty good idea, order of magnitude, what's the impact potential. So there's really two basic questions that we need to know. One is, what's the unit impact of the technology, product, or service? So when you sell one product, deploy your service to one customer, how much emissions is that going to save? How much is it going to reduce emissions by over the course of a year, let's say? And why? Explain to us why also. And you could tell us, amount of kilowatt hours you're saving or tons of carbon you're reducing, however you want to say it. And that's the unit impact. Okay, fantastic. We know what you're doing now is saving X amount of greenhouse gases. Second question is, how much? How many of these are you going to sell, right? How much are you going to scale? So what's kind of your maximum annual impact on scale? How many units per year are you going to be selling at your maximum level? And then, well, when is that going to be? Is that 5 years from now, 10 years, 20 years, right? How long is it going to take you to get there? So once we have the answers to those questions, almost all new technologies, particularly disruptive technologies, follow a common shape called an S-shaped adoption curve, right? It starts off slow, exponential growth, and then asymptotic to some maximum level. So when we know what the maximum level is, and we know when it is, that gives us the XY coordinate at the top of the S curve. Then we could draw the S curve underneath it from now till 2050, measure the area under the curve, and that gives us the cumulative emission reduction potential between now and 2050. And amazingly enough, many entrepreneurs that, they're spending their time developing technologies. They're not spending their time measuring areas under S curves. So they often don't even know what their potential is by 2050. So we help them find it out. And that's why we've made it publicly available. So if you go to cleanenergyventures.com/SERC for Simple Emission Reduction Calculator, anyone could answer those questions for their project or their company or their service and get, again, this order of magnitude assessment. Now, that's just a first step for us, right? So once we have that initial assessment, if the company looks interesting to us and all the dimensions I talked about earlier, right? Is it capital efficient? Is it early stage, right? Then we're going to go into really deep details. Like, okay, demonstrate your technology actually reduces emissions by so much. Let's look into your financial projections. How are you going to grow? Who's going to buy your product or service? Who are your customers? What are the markets? What are the size of those markets? How are they growing over time? So can we really believe all of those numbers? And then so we validate it on a very detailed level. And that's what we do in our diligence process. And we link the impact assessment to the financial projections, right? To their pro forma. So we want to know you're going to be able to do this profitably. And the more profitable you come, the more impact reductions there are, and vice versa. And so, when we're assessing, return potential on the investment and the profitability of the company, that ties directly into the emission impact assessment as well. It all works together.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So almost last question for this part of the interview. So what's your personal view on the climate crisis? I mean, as I mentioned to you before, are we doomed? What would you say what would you tell to people who feel demoralized? I mean, you see all those terrible news constantly in the press. We already feel and those visible consequences of climate change. So you are part of the the people who are optimistic about like change are possible, but what would you tell them?
Well, I mean, I'd start off, this is incredibly serious moment we're in, right? So if we don't significantly change how we do things, and this is, technologies being deployed as well as government policy around the world, if we don't significantly change that and soon, then unfortunately, there's a pretty good chance that we are. This is the trends are not promising. If you really dig deep and you evaluate the IPCC reports and all the scientific data, there's a probability spectrum, right? We could do nothing and be fine. You could also walk into the middle of a crowded highway and not happen to be hit by a car. Right.
To play lottery then.
You could play roulette and hit one particular number. So it's an odds game, but our odds are not good if we do nothing across all sectors of society, right? Companies, investors, entrepreneurs, governments, consumers, everyone has to play a role. That said, we still can turn the ship, right? There is absolutely, what's so fortunate about what we do is we are seeing these thousands of companies that can help solve the problem, right? Every day we're seeing a new company that can help solve the problem. And if you add up that 2.5 gigaton times, our fund 1 portfolio, and now we're going to have a fund 2 portfolio, and you add up that 2.5 gigaton times both of those portfolios, doesn't solve the whole problem, but it makes a pretty good dent, right? And then if other investors are doing the same thing, and if governments are supporting it and industry is supporting it, then yes, we got to work hard. This is kind of like, what happened in World War II. The United States at the very beginning of World War II had relatively little industrial capacity, and was not involved at all in the fight. And so if that remained, then World War II might have ended up very, very differently. But there was a point in time where there was a switch. Mm-hmm. And the US transformed. They transformed the industry, got involved in the fight in a big way, and shifted the outcome. We have to do that kind of shift. And we've done it before. We have to do that kind of shift, and we can turn this tremendous crisis and challenge into an opportunity, because we can make a world that's better than it is today, right? A zero carbon world in 2050, not only are you saving yourself from climate change, air pollution sickens and kills millions of people around the world. I mean, horrible, horrible health costs, right? Water availability, right? I mean, there are many people who do not have access to clean water or enough food, enough like good, healthy food. And you know, our water, our land is becoming polluted, our airs, our oceans are dying. So, I mean, this isn't just about how hot it is outside or whether there's a big storm or a fire. I mean, this is everything we need to survive and have healthy, fulfilling lives. So there are a lot of co-benefits. So when we solve climate, we solve a lot of other problems that makes the world a better place to live in. So, and I'm optimistic we can do it if we make the effort, collective effort.
Thank you. It's always like energizing to hear people like you sharing this positive view. So how can the community of listeners can help you today, if anything? Someone listening to you and say, okay, what's the call to action for you?
Well, I mean, I'd say for entrepreneurs, if you have the potential to create a company that's going to have, you know, massive impact potential in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then come to cleanenergyventures.com and we have a short application form that goes to our 30-member screening committee of extremely experienced folks who can help you even if we don't invest, I'll say, right? So if you have a really, really serious idea, then, you know, we always want to hear about it. And, you know, we're looking to, you know, really catalyze the funds of our investors into these companies that will have that kind of impact.
Fantastic. So any question I should have asked you, I did not for this part of the interview?
Man, I could tell you about more of our companies, but I don't know how many more hours we have left. I mean, because they're all.
It's about you. What's your timing, David? I mean, we had the chance to already have you for almost an hour, and tell me, I'm happy to keep going.
I'm open. If I mean, certainly, if you have any other areas to explore, I'm open to it.
Thank you so much, David, for being so generous with your time and your incredible insights on the industry. I'm literally very excited to see so many brilliant people like you or your team at Clean Energy Ventures putting so much effort to move the ball towards a better and cleaner world. So thank you again.
My pleasure. This is, thank you for doing this, right? Really appreciate you, getting the word out.
Thank you so much, David. Hi, it's Guillaume again. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, do not hesitate to share an episode with a friend. Also, if you value the work we do for the climate tech ecosystem, here is how you can contribute to it. Today, I'm asking for your support and a donation or sponsorship to make the work of our self-funded team more viable. Even a small contribution means a lot to us. In any case, I will invite you to subscribe to our channels and visit our website startupbasecamp.org to discover more episodes like this one. And get your membership to access all our members' exclusive content. So remember, all of this is possible because of your support and donation. And we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. Let's keep in touch, and I hope you will enjoy our next show with us.